Hello Sainers, my name's Woody and this is Saints TV. Jake's got me on to discuss some of the stats after last week's loss to Adelaide, so let's go over some of the standout numbers. Now, clearly there were a few more negatives than positives, so let's start with the positives. We had 4 players debut, 3 of which played their first AFL match. The other was former dog Jack Macrae, who I think most would agree was best on ground, with 34 disposals, 23 contested possessions, 12 clearances, 7 score involvements, 6 inside 50s and 5 tackles. Of the other first gamers, Max Hall stood out as one of the only options inside 50 for the majority of the first half. He managed to get 2 goals, 16 disposals, 6 score involvements, 5 marks, and all 3 of his tackles were tackles inside 50. Harry Boyd did fairly well for his first match too. He got 27 hit-outs, 4 clearances, 12 disposals, 8 contested possessions, and was equal second best for us with 83.3% disposal efficiency. There were moments he could have done better, such as this one, where the player behind runs past him to get the goal assist, but that's not his man running past him, so he can be somewhat forgiven. This is also a perfect lesson for him about the speed and desperation that's required at AFL level. The final debutant was Liam O'Connell, who didn't have the busiest day with only 7 disposals, but he did okay, getting 4 intercept possessions, 3 marks, 2 1%ers, and was our best of field with ball in hand, going at 85.7 disposal efficiency. And considering we're talking about the youth, it's probably the right time to mention some things they need to work on. Wilson had 8 turnovers yesterday, Naz had 6, Windy, Hammer and Garcia had 5, and these sort of numbers are understandable due to their age, but if we want to improve sooner rather than later, they need to get them under control. I also want to single out Naz for a second, as he's the most experienced of that group. As some have noted, Naz's form has been down and the numbers I said earlier don't look great, but he did improve in the second half, going from 4 disposals per turnover to 5.5. That is still lower than his average last year of 6.6 though. That being said, he did have the second most intercept possessions with 7, behind Ari with 9. So it's not as if his entire game was bad, but we do need him back to his best pronto. If we look at clearances, we had positives and negatives. We ended up with only 1 less than Adelaide, and at halftime we were only down in centre clearances by 2, though at 3/4 time that was 7. In that period, Adelaide scored 7-3 to our 3-4, and 4 of those goals came from centre clearances in a 7.5 minute period. Ultimately, we had 46 points against from stoppages too, so I want to zoom in on those moments for a second. This first centre bounce ends up in a clearance from Alex Neil-Bullen, but I want to touch on how. There's a tackle and a second bounce immediately after the first. This time, Alex Neil-Bullen comes up to the stoppage from half forward. Naz is his man and asks Steele to take him. This requires him to man Neil-Bullen and crouch when the ball is thrown up. It's knocked forward for Adelaide, which draws Steele and Sinclair to the contest. It eventually spills to Neil-Bullen, who handballs over the top to Saligo, who finds Cumming for a goal. In the next centre bounce, Steele is loose on his man Crouch. Sinclair is sucked into him to try and defend, and the ball ends up out the back to Saligo to kick it over the contest to a 1-on-1, where Peatling runs onto a goal. Next, Brian taps it down to Rankin. He doesn't even possess the ball and taps it back to Sinclair's man Saligo, who again bombs it towards 50. Rankin does eventually goal from the 50-metre line from a free kick about 30 seconds later. In the next centre bounce, much like the second, Steele isn't close enough to Crouch. He draws Macrae on Adelaide's defensive side and handballs it to Saligo, who bombs it inside 50. This time it only resulted in a point to Rankin before Neil-Bullen gets a goal about a minute later. The next centre bounce is much like before. Steele's man, this time Dawson, gets the ball off the bounce, still can't keep up, and Dawson slams a massive goal. I highlight that area for 2 reasons. One, from there Adelaide kicked 6-4-40 to our 5-8-38, so if we had better managed that period and the opening quarter, as our Ari Pav mentioned, maybe things could have gone differently. And secondly, while our youngsters didn't do great in terms of turnovers, our leaders weren't always doing a good job of leading either. If we look at our experience versus turnovers, there does seem to be a correlation. But when you add disposals, you can see that the kids were the ones getting it more. There were other things we could discuss too, individual efforts, but the main thing that stood out to me was that we got beaten across the board in almost every marking stat, particularly intercept marking as well, which led to 72 points against from turnover. And unfortunately, that's going to happen when your disposal efficiency is 66.6% and your disposal efficiency inside 50 is just 46.4. So we need to see better efficiency numbers to get the marks needed to control the play better. And while I know we're not a bad running side, I think sometimes that means just taking the mark and slowing it down rather than looking for the overlap runner. But I think that covers most of my major points. If you want to see more of my face, I've got my own channel at Wooden Spoon Data, but I'll be here every week to go over some of the standout Saints stats. I want to thank Jake for having me. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week. Go Saints.